But we also want them to learn something to take back, not just sustainability, but we also want it to give them some type of practical training. Yes, it does help in terms of deal with the current situation that might occur at the event, but also if a certain situation arises at home, they would be prepared to deal with it. For example, we teach them hands-only CPR. So of course, if something were to happen at the event, they would be better prepared to be able to respond. But they can also take that learning back home to their communities, places of work, etc., that becomes an important lesson or teaching.
Meet Mike Nishi, COO of Chicago Event Management, responsible for delivering one of America's most beloved events, the Bank of America Chicago Marathon. Mike's love for the Chicago Marathon dates back to 1982, where he first volunteered for the event back in high school and remains in the organisation today, some 40 plus years on. For me, Mike is one of the most genuine, caring and thoughtful leaders in the mass participation industry worldwide, and I greatly appreciate his time to come onto the podcast and share his incredible insights. There's one thing I took away from the podcast was how the Chicago Marathon is so much more than just a weekend event once a year. Mike really is passionate about the broader positive lasting impacts the event can have on its community 365 days a year. Now, it's been a tough period for all, but mass participation industry in particular. And in this podcast, Mike shares with us the highs and lows of 2020 and 2021, including the unique ways in which they've been able to engage with their volunteers during lockdown and the important role that technology has played in enabling them to do so. In this podcast, Mike also discusses the important role volunteers play in creating a lasting legacy when it comes to environmental and social change within the community. With 45,000 participants and 12,000 volunteers alone, Mike highlights how organisations can and should consider education and training as a means not only to enhance the event experience, but to give back to communities in a meaningful way. Now, this podcast was recorded remotely, so we do apologise for broken audio at times. He's hoping these podcasts can be recorded in person sooner rather than later. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Mike Nishi of Chicago Event Management. Mate, thank you so much for joining us on the Engage Volunteer. How are you in Chicago over there? You good?
Yeah, everything's going as best it can these days, and a lot colder than you're probably experiencing where you are,
Correct.
Getting ready to come back indoors and keep warm, in the colder months that we have ahead of us in the Midwest here in Chicago.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Now, it's obviously been clearly a tough year for you guys. For our listeners, can you just give me a wrap of what Chicago Event Management does and the events that you guys look after?
Sure. In a normal year, when things were going well, we produced several different events, but two of our big ones at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year. One is the Bank of America Shamrock Shuffle. It's an 8K in the spring in March, and it's basically like the rite of spring. So coming out of a cold winter months, it's the really first time people can get outdoors, and it's a really great kickoff to our season. Then, as you can imagine, there's different events that take place throughout the year, but the one that bookends and ends the season off with a bang per se is the Bank of America Chicago Marathon that you're familiar with, and probably many of your listeners as well.
Yeah.
So we produce both of those events as well as a number of others throughout the season.
Yeah, for sure. So Chief Operating Officer, there's lots that goes into that role. What does your day-to-day look like, and what are you ultimately responsible for?
Well, currently it's been a lot of video conferencing, and it's been a lot harder to really engage with our team, making sure that we're reaching out and staying connected, finding ways to stay and providing the communication necessary as we're all working remotely. Mm-hmm. However, my role as a Chief Operating Officer is really coming up with the overall strategy for the entire organization, operations, the marketing, the workforce management teams, et cetera. So, that's my day-to-day responsibility. So really overseeing the day-to-day operation of the entire company.
For sure. And you've been there for quite some time, mate. How long's the journey been?
Well, I've been associated or affiliated with the Chicago Marathon since back in 1989. I really got my start working on the marathon itself, and indirectly in 1982 when I was in high school, volunteering on the event, working for the event in any way possible. And so they gave me my first opportunity working full time in 89. And then Terry Pinkowski, the executive director, and myself had been working since that time. Then we formed our company, Chicago Event Management, in 1996. And then we're really brought back on board to run and operate the Chicago Marathon from that time to where we are today.
Lovely, mate. Lovely. And they couldn't get rid of you for since 1989.
No, definitely. That bad
Sticking
penny
around.
that keeps turning up.
Very good, mate. So now 2020, tough year for mass participation, in particular in the States, obviously a massive impact. Can you talk to me about the impact it's had for your business and obviously for the Chicago Marathon?
Sure. I mean, obviously, just like many of our other partners in the industry, it has impacted us as a company, and just really trying to figure out how to continue to work with our team, to keep our team busy and working remotely. So that's been a challenge in itself. But we're fortunate to be able to keep our current team intact,
Sure.
working remotely, keeping them busy. Obviously, with the events that we had with the Shamrock Shuffle and when COVID started, we were 2 weeks away from really kicking off and hosting that event. And then we had to quickly cancel and unpack that event. A lot of things were already produced. So there's been a lot of money that was already spent on that event. There's a lot of materials that are still in place that are already printed and dated from that time to where we are today. And unfortunately, having to cancel the Chicago Marathon as well. At least we had some opportunities to change and cancel orders and have a little bit more time so we didn't create a lot of waste. So yeah, there's been an impact to those events, and especially to the participants and to all the constituents that have been involved in that marathon and to the charities, et cetera. So it has been a wide impact to so many other people that have been involved in those events.
For sure. And it's one thing maybe not spoken about enough. A lot of people speaking about the events being cancelled, but you touched on there the charities. The flow-on effect here is some major charities, they're going all in on the major fundraising being, for example, the Chicago Marathon. And how do you see the impact for charities this year? And do you see a recovery from that?
Yeah, there definitely was a significant impact to the charities. It's one of the reasons why we felt it was important to have or create to host a virtual event. It definitely was not to replace the in-person experience. However, it gave our participants something and a goal that was set to continue to strive for, and especially those that were raising funds or could continue raising funds and complete their mission for the charities that they were running on behalf. So again, the numbers are positive, but clearly not the same levels that we experienced in the past or last year as a point of reference. But at least many of those charities were able to continue to raise funds for their respective causes as well as awareness. So it was important for us to have that event for people to continue that mission.
Sure.
And just to answer your question, as we talked about earlier, one of the things that we have successfully done was at least launch registration for 2021. And we do have a tiered registration process where this first phase, we basically open it up to participants that decided to defer from this year's marathon to a future year, as well as our charity partners, so they can start the recruiting process to recruit runners to take on the challenge or to raise funds for their respective causes for next year's event. So letting them get that head start. So hopefully they'll be able to recruit as many people to raise much needed funds and create awareness for next year.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get to the volunteer engagement shortly, but I'm interested in your thoughts on the virtual event. It's obviously something very new that a lot of people have had to adapt to for this year. How did you find the experience and how did your participants find it?
I think it was our virtual experience. We had an opportunity to create so many different elements. It wasn't just the marathon distance itself. We had a 1 mile event, 5K, 8K, half marathon distance, and the full marathon. So we had a different distance for anyone that wanted to start running, continue running. So it was well received. And, we also were able to create the virtual experience with the virtual expo, creating different fun and engagement opportunities, not just for the participants, but for family members, spectators, volunteers. So we wanted to create something for everyone. By the time it got around, I think, as you know, the challenge will be is like, what from these experience can we incorporate or include in an in-person setting? And I think that'll be really a great opportunity. I think there's a lot of great lessons learned. I think there's a lot of great tools out there that can definitely enhance a participant's experience in an in-person and live setting going forward. So we're learning through all that. And, maybe it's all these bits and parts and pieces used differently that can really change the way that we engage the participants, spectators, vendors and volunteers alike. So we're looking forward to that opportunity to incorporate a lot of what we did learn, and we'll continue to incorporate, from this technology that we've had to get used to and had to utilize to create that the virtual experience this year.
Yeah, interesting. We'll talk about technology shortly as well. So I guess in a normal year, Mike, what does the volunteer program look like for the Bank of America Chicago Marathon, but obviously the other events that you guys do as well? What does it look like? Have you got a team internally that are managing a significant database, and what are the steps that you go into across the year to make sure that by the time event morning comes around, you're confident everyone's turning up, smiling faces, ready to go?
Yeah, and we do have a team, and it's, the volunteer program and manager is part of what we call the workforce management team. And that entire group is responsible for anything workforce management, whether it's event staff, vendors, contractors, and volunteers alike. As you're very well familiar with and have a great tool available for the registration and management of staff, we have the similar type of tool available in terms of the recruiting, better identifying the different roles and responsibilities that are needed. And just like the similar process where we need to identify what the need is to be able to support the event in the different areas. Then we get a sense of how many different volunteers are needed. And then, really then starting the recruiting process based on what those numbers look like. So I think it's very similar to what a lot of events go through. And as soon as we have the number of people that we need, and as we get closer to race time and we have those different role descriptions created and identified, then we go through the different training necessary for those key volunteers, depending on their level and role that they are performing, as well as the general volunteers. And we go through and writing up what those requirements are, then go through that training process, whether it's in person or if it's just in time type of training as they arrive on site. And as you can imagine, with the attrition that does occur, come race weekend and race day, and then we're able to pivot and shift people to different roles. And just with that just-in-time training, being able to, get people up to speed based on where those needs are. So yeah, I know that's a lot more involved, but that was just a really quick overview of the program.
Perfect. So Mike, I'm interested in understanding the scope of the workforce team. Is it one person responsible for paid staff and contractors and one staff responsible for the volunteers?
Yeah, so our workforce management team is of 5 total people. Specific to the volunteer, there are 2 people. One is the primary manager, and then 2 interns support them as we get into the heat when things really start to take off and additional work comes on board. So it is a relatively small team to be able to manage, especially for the marathon, such a large workforce of up to 12,000 volunteers that we need to recruit for that weekend.
And how many paid staff and contractors are you looking at, like total bodies on site? Is that team of 5 managing?
Yeah, so that team of 5 is definitely managing all of them. But again, we'll bring on additional resources with outside contractors. But in addition to managing the 12,000 volunteers that will register, we'll also have about 1,600 contractors and paid key contractors and staff, event staff that we'll bring on board to help manage the event. And then in addition, working with the different vendors as well as their staff that they bring on site. So making sure, as you can imagine, with workforce management, all the things that they'll need in order to get their job done, whether it's uniforms, accreditation, et cetera. So that team is responsible for, making sure that the entire workforce for the events are taken care of, recruited, managed, and all the resources necessary for them to get their jobs done.
For sure. And so you mentioned training. Is there an element of online training or inductions you do, or is it most of it in person from previous years?
So in the past, it had been a lot of the in-person type of training, the event production meetings. A lot of it was more from documents in terms of here's what your role is and here's the roles and responsibilities. Whether it's like based on the registration process, as soon as you sign up, you would have the information at your fingertips. But not a lot of the video type of training or online type of training. However, and I'm sure you, like you mentioned, you'll bring this up from a technology standpoint, know what we're doing from video conferencing, et cetera. These are things that now we're going to look at more to be able to provide, the virtual training more reluctant to do in the past. And I think we're a lot more comfortable these days knowing so many people are used to working in this type of
Correct.
environment.
Yeah, I understand that. And it's definitely one that's, I guess from our side, I've always seen the benefit of it and seen it work well. But I understand the want and need to have the in-person training. I mean, it is almost another point of engagement, wouldn't you say, along the journey to show that these people have now completed training. There's a more likelihood of them turning up on the day. Do you factor training as engagement?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're spot on there. And you're right. This will give us more opportunity to bring the training to where they are, engage with them earlier. As you know,
Yes.
it's like it's the closer you get is like that's the group that you know that you'll retain. And a lot of times it's just really hard to coordinate. But as you just mentioned, with the opportunity to do these more Zoom or online conferencing, we'll be able to do this earlier. And based on that, I think you're right. The engagement is going to encourage them to definitely show up or to get more involved in making sure that we can provide the level of training and education that they're seeking. And
Sure.
I think, like, it's like you probably volunteered an event and you hate when you're not being put to use.
Correct.
Like when you don't know
Especially when you're giving up your time.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So, this is a great opportunity to learn what we've been and applying this technology and using it to our advantage and deepening that engagement with our constituents.
Yeah, for sure. Really interesting, mate. And one thing you touched on before was about the attrition rates come event day. You don't need to tell me the answer if you're not comfortable, but like, is there a number you try and work towards? If it's 12,000 that you need, you try and recruit 14,000 to cover. Like, are you recruiting more actively because of that? Or are you kind of hoping that you can shuffle them around when they turn up, knowing that there might be excess?
I think it's a little bit of both. So yes, the attrition rate, we recruit to that 12,000 number, knowing we're not going to get that many people to show up on event day. And part of that plan, just like you said, and we're very well used to, is being able to pivot and shift some of those volunteers into roles that you're just able to conduct that just-in-time training, where you can put someone at the start line as well as the finish line, and it's not that complicated. Or if you switched roles, and I think it's similar in terms of just like participants on race day, you do have a large attrition rate or a number versus how many people register versus how many people show up, and they're almost somewhat similar in terms of volunteer. And as you know, you even have a higher rate of attrition with inclement days, when it's raining, snowing, when it's cold. So we do build all that into the buffer.
Yeah, I understand. And are there elements that your team do with that engagement of volunteers in the lead up? For example, the 24 hours before the shift reminders or appreciations, like what other steps in that journey you mentioned, from registration, training, screening, shift allocation? What other steps are involved there to make sure that people are engaged and not dropping off? Because it can be a long period of time between initial registration and event day.
No, definitely. And I think there definitely needs to be more and I know that there's more that we can do and will be doing in the future for that engagement. But I think it's typical in terms of here's, when you sign up, you get that immediate confirmation. Then you send out maybe 2 or 3 additional direct emails based on the roles, and then a reminder, the week of the event, especially a week before the role. So some roles might start as early as Monday of race week, so we're ahead of them a week, or it's like that Monday of race week, we're reminding them about their responsibilities on their Friday shift, Saturday shift, or race day shift.
Yeah.
So we don't want to try to create too much email fatigue or communication fatigue, so they do pay attention to the information that we do send. So we do try to be mindful of that and make sure that they're paying attention to the information that's really important, that the event requires their full attention in order for them to properly perform their job.
Yeah, for sure. An interesting one I'm interested to get your thoughts on is the personalization of communications versus systems and technology to automate a lot of this. There's always the fine balance between blasting comms and knowing every volunteer, but given you've got 12,000 of them, that's very difficult to do. How do you guys manage that to make sure that people feel like they're being listened to, or they've got a sore back, they can't work on these types of shifts? How do you make sure that people are engaged with your team when you still have over 10,000 volunteers you need to engage with?
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder with I hate to say in terms of the lower rungs, but the general volunteers that show up, it's a lot harder for us to know
For
them
sure.
as well, because some of them come through they're maybe students and we don't have their direct contact and the relationship that we have like with a key volunteer that might be a group leader that's there to help year after year that we
Correct.
are familiar with. So, we do know the ones that do come back year over year a little bit better to the other volunteers. We do try to customize and be very specific in terms of being able to reach out to them by name or in their, specific emails or messaging to them. But
Yeah,
I
I
know that
understand.
there's a lot more we can definitely do and should do.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. And regarding those people that keep coming back year on year, I mean, you've been there since 89. Mike, I'm sure there's probably some volunteers that might have been there a similar amount of time. Can you talk to those return volunteers as to why they keep coming back? And secondly, how you engage and reward those volunteers as well?
No, definitely. We are fortunate that we do have so many volunteers that come back year after year. Some people that have been there longer than I've been there since 1989.
Wow.
One, they just have a passion for the sport. Two, they love the event and especially what the event means to our city here in Chicago for all the benefits that you're well aware of, the economic impact, the impact to charities. So they obviously want to stay involved. And I think from a retention standpoint, we always want to improve what we do to retain the teams that we have, and especially the volunteers. So, we try to do different recognitions in our newsletters, calling attention to different volunteers that have gone above and beyond, showing the
And
ones
Mike,
that.
sorry, is
Yep.
that a newsletter directly just to volunteers, like a press release sort of that goes directly to that group, or is that to the whole network that you have, community?
Yeah, so we do both. So we can
Sure.
segment it where it's just the volunteer population as well as to the general like email database that goes to all constituents or then specific to the participants themselves. We try to call attention if it's about the runner newsletter, making sure that we can put something in there about the volunteers, a specific
Sure.
one, a group, so we can call attention to them as well and get that recognition by the runners so they can appreciate what goes into it, especially those individuals that commit their own personal time to volunteer to create that experience for the runners.
Yeah, that makes sense. And 12,000 is a big number. Do you have a breakdown of where that's coming from? For example, 50% are coming from groups and the other 50% from general or 30% are returning year on year. Like, what is the breakdown of that big number?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know the majority, and I'm probably wrong on this count, but it sounds about right. 75% or 80%, come from groups.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
the 20% would be walk-ups or general volunteers that are signing up or doing outreach. But most of it is, group support, whether it's running clubs, high schools, university colleges that are coming through a group organizer or through, a specific organization.
And why are those groups coming to volunteer with you?
Some, well, as you can imagine, like for high schools and whatnot, they're looking for service hours for their students. Other ones, especially the charity programs, looking for fundraising opportunities. So we will make donations based on different thresholds or requirements. If you have X number of people, you'll get a donation based on that number of people that show up. So as you can imagine, a lot of even the school programs looking for additional fundraising opportunities for their programs, they're always looking for opportunities to volunteer, to get new uniforms, to get X, Y, or Z, or what that school or program might need.
Sure.
So we've been fortunate that there is that need to find that type of fundraising opportunity.
Yeah. And those young university students that are coming out versus perhaps the retirees from the local bowls club, they're all coming out with as individuals wanting to get an experience that would be different from one to the other. I know I mentioned to you before about how do you differentiate and personalize your communications with such a large number of 12,000 plus volunteers is next to impossible. But is there anything you try and do to engage with, for example, the university groups that are coming out to make sure they're in roles or responsibilities that might relate more to them or their studies to make sure they get a good experience? Because you don't want the bowls club to be working on the fence crew following the race, you know what I mean? So How do you try and split that responsibility up so that the right people are in the right roles?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I'm sure you might have the solution there because we don't necessarily have that. we're trying to, when we work and say through a high school, it might be for a specific aid station, and they're just doing it for the service hours, and maybe they have no interest at all, but we're asking them to do that. But that would be a great opportunity. I think a better way to identify what their interests are, because in the future, when they're no longer part of the school, you want them to come back and see if there is that opportunity and communicate. It's like there's a great way. Working and volunteering is a great way to network with other like-minded individuals, as well as finding that opportunity to get an internship, to find that opportunity to work with the brand, to find that opportunity to even work with the organization managing or operating that event. So yeah, I think that's a great opportunity.
For sure. And it's certainly an interesting one that I think technology helps solve that problem, because it's, with the numbers you're dealing with, without technology, it's next to impossible to capture that data, firstly in the first place, but then be able to use it and separate and action that information to make sure those people are getting the experience. But it's a similar answer, though, Mike, to quite a few people on the podcast, but I certainly see scope for it in the future to try our best as possible to personalize that experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Now, mate, bit of a sidetrack here. Every time we meet in Singapore each year for our good friend Chris Robb's Mass Participation World Conferences, I'm always really interested when you speak about the sustainability and what the Chicago Marathon do for sustainability. Now, if you could just summarize what it is that you do with sustainability with the Chicago Marathon, but then secondly, how do you bring the volunteers along with that journey is what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, well, as you know, and I speak to so often, I mean, I think all of our events have the responsibility to be mindful of
responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think we have a great opportunity, and, not just to communicate and, have a perfect platform to talk about sustainability and the importance of it, whether it's environmental as well as social. And so we have a perfect platform for our participants, the spectators, as well as our volunteers, to be able to send that message and the exhibit, and being that leader in our sport, to be able to showcase what we're trying to do. And there's so many different things, especially from an environmental side, that we should be doing and practicing and teaching. And I think that's the important part, is the teaching. So it's one thing to just show, okay, we're going to recycle this bottle and put it in a bin, but also showing, what can be done, the full life cycle. So for example, we find partners and show and how we can collect the plastic bottles, turn that into flakes, how that's then we find a recycling manufacturer. So we get the partner, we can illustrate what's done with the plastic bottle and how it's gone through the journey. It turns into flakes, into pellets, into yarn. Then that fabric then can be used to make 100% recycled polyester, which is basically all the material that's necessary or used to create the dry fit shirts, the different shoes that Nike makes. The Nike t-shirts that our participants wear are made from 100% recycled polyester. When you're able to tell that story and illustrate it, people all of a sudden go, aha, I get it. And so we try to teach them that way, from visually, from something tangible, to show them here was one product and what the journey is and what it can create. And that's what we want to do, and talk about the education. And so, as we've talked about, Shannon, it's important when we can take that information, that learning, and the volunteers and runners can take that home. Because again, it's 45,000 finishers at the marathon big? Yes. But the impact is all those runners taking it back to their homes, to their communities, and then to sharing that information and knowledge to their communities. Will this continue to expand and grow? So we have that same mindset. We try to find opportunities to create that story, create storytelling moments to share that with our volunteers, with our runners, so they can take that back home and affect the communities and where they live.
For sure. Yeah, really interesting, mate. And I think it's a really important point for people that work in the event space, is that your event is one day a year. It's a limited amount of time to impact on people. It's the other 300 plus days of the year. Well, it's more a week sometimes for you guys, isn't it? So it's the rest of the year that you'd love that legacy, really, of your event to infiltrate the community with some important messages like sustainability. So I guess for a volunteer journey, is that across the recruitment process, or even the training or inductions, to be like, guys, here's a really important thing for our brand and our event is sustainability, and here's how you can be involved? When are you starting to engage with them? I'm presuming it's not just on event day.
No, no, no. It's all in every role that a volunteer has, or anyone for event staff, etc. Wherever you're doing your role, there's always something that needs to be taken in consideration when it's about, and we educate everyone about the entire program. And that's the storytelling. We tell them that entire story, or three really clear examples, so they understand what we're trying to accomplish. And regardless of the role, that's the information that's shared with them. And then specific to their role, then we do identify if it is reduce, reuse, recycle, where those resources are, and how they need to understand how they get involved, how they communicate it, how they educate runners or volunteers in terms of what they need to do in their specific area.
For sure. Makes sense. I like it. So, Mike, you've been great with your time. I really appreciate it. What we always finish each podcast with is a couple of top tips. So for you, what are the top tips in volunteer engagement you've found across your career?
I think the number one, and this is the question that you asked earlier, in terms of why do some of those volunteers, or the ones that have been with us so many years, come back year after year after year. And it all starts with the leadership of the organization and everyone in their roles. And, again, as you know, the volunteer, they don't do this for a job. They enjoy it because they might be passionate of the sport or what we're about. And, we would never ask a volunteer to do something that we weren't willing to do with them or along their side. And we do lead by example. And no matter, we always try to find that opportunity to do it with them. So, that's really important. When they see Carrie Pinkowski, the executive director, going and stuffing runner packets, and doing it with them, they're just like, you're Carrie? It's like, we'd never think that you'd do this. And so that goes a long way. It just shows how committed we are and appreciate what they do, and we're willing to do it with them. And so that's like the biggest thing that I could ever say. And I think the number one example I'd like to give.
Sure. Reminded me there a little, what are you seeing in volunteering trends, given people have more things they can do with their time at the moment? Volunteering, there's 1,000 places they could go and volunteer, but there's a million other things they could do, or just sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I mean, why are you seeing numbers dropping off of people coming back, or conversely, are you seeing numbers increase because people want to give back? Or what are you seeing in trends wise in volunteering?
Well, before the pandemic hit, I think the trends are like more recently over I'll say the past 5 years, our numbers have been increasing based on the demand and our need. They've been coming back more frequently. And I think to your point, everything that I've been talking about is like the storytelling. Once we can show and tell that story, it's not just show up and do the work. It's like, here's what you're contributing to. We want to inspire individuals to give back to their communities. And this is a great way to do that. So we want to ensure that we're also, reiterating our mission, vision, values, which we know do align with so many people. And once the alignment takes place, or they see what we're trying to do and they're aligned with their own values, do they want to be part of something great like that? They want to be able to contribute. So I think that's been an important part of it. Lastly, I think that we talked about earlier is like the education about their specific role, but we also want them to learn something to take back, like we said, to their homes, not just sustainability, but we also want to give them some type of practical training. Yes, it does help in terms of deal with the current situation that might occur at the event, but also if a certain situation arises at home, they would be prepared to deal with it. For example, we teach them hands-only CPR. So of course, if something were to happen at the event, they would be better prepared to be able to respond. But they can also take that learning back home to their homes, to their communities, places of work, etc., that becomes an important lesson or teaching. And we've been doing the same and incorporating leadership and management, where of course that helps them with their specific role, but it also helps them at school, helps them in their communities and places of work as well. So we want them to take something back that will help support them, whatever they're doing in their job or at home as well.
I think it's a really interesting point, Mike. I know I'm meant to be wrapping up here, but I might just ask one more question about it, because I see a lot of people advertising for volunteers saying, come help out on the day, you'll get a t-shirt and a hat, but nothing much more. And then they're wondering why people aren't turning up. But what you're talking about is a much deeper, greater connection with a person. And I understand that not every event is of your size and have that connection with people. It's chalk and cheese sometimes with that. But I guess the lesson you're teaching there is about trying to connect that person with your organization's mission compared to come help out on the day for a free t-shirt.
Exactly. And I think that's important. And, once you create something, they realize that it's like how we care about the individual and where they're from and their communities, that we're invested in them. And it's not just, a one-way street, just looking for something from them, but we want them to take something back away from the event that can help them as an individual, as well as their family and their communities.
Yeah, really interesting. Fantastic. Now, working with volunteers creates some weird, wacky, funny, sad moments. Is there one that stands out to you across your career? I know that's a very difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, each year there's always unique stories that come out. It's tough to pinpoint one specific moment with a volunteer. But I think overall, and I hate to end on a sad note, but there was a couple key volunteers that have been with our organization year after year. And unfortunately, 2 people passed away this year. Way too soon, way too young. And they both worked together in one part of the team at the start line. And, just when things are so bad, everything that we're going through and, how much they meant to our team, they didn't pass away at the same time. One passed away in March and the other passed away at the end of August. And it was really impacted our entire organization, but especially that team that worked so well close together year after year, as well as the different events. But the positive that did come out of it on Marathon Sunday this year, it was all virtual, but that team and group decided to come together and honor both of them and do something virtually. So they set up and did a Zoom call from the start line, which would have been that start time on their behalf.
Yeah, interesting, mate. And it shows how much it clearly means to them. So
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about the loss, mate, but nice to see sort of, it talks to what a lot in the podcast I've picked up about getting out of the way and letting the program run its own journey a little. And it feels like your community there has taken its own sort of step to take ownership and say, hey, this is important to us.
Yeah. And just one more note on that. It's like, that wasn't even, an idea that I came up with. That was that team that said,
letting them run.
Yeah, they recruited it. They brought the coffee out. Someone brought all the equipment and a big monitor or generator to get it going. So then the people on the Zoom call could witness the start and be part of that community. It was amazing to see.
Yeah, interesting. We did a great podcast with Tammy from South by Southwest. And incredible volunteer program they run, but she really spoke about the input and impact and letting volunteers run their own show is what has evolved their volunteer program to what it is today, compared to trying to confine it and say, this is how we do things here, is really being open to that feedback and allowing people's input. And clearly, as you've just highlighted there, that's what's happening in Chicago. Mate, the last question I've got for you is about success. So for you personally, when you're sitting at Christmas, I know this year's probably the outlier, isn't it? But for most years, what does success look like for you and for Chicago Marathon volunteer program as well?
Oh, I think success is being able to be with my family and understanding that our volunteers are doing the same thing. I think success for our volunteer program is just knowing all the work that we've done with them and everything that I mentioned in terms of the education and the training that we've provided. And hopefully that's helping them as individuals and their families as well. So, it's always a great opportunity to reflect all the great work that our team does, the event and what that impact has on our communities and, lasting effect that it has on all the individuals that it touches. So that really makes all of us and our team really proud of what we're able to produce. It is a life-changing moment in how you're involved, whether you're participating in it or working on it. There's always something to be taken away, and it all really impacts all of us, and we're able to share those experiences. So at the end of the year, that's what you're always proud of and really looking forward to and motivate you to step off into the next year and carrying that on, and how can you improve that and really help other people. So, that's what really, makes me excited about what we do. And that's truly success in my mind.
Yeah, really interesting, Mike. And I think if there's one thing I've pulled out of today, it's about creating a program bigger than the shift itself and leaving your community to go away, walking away from that day with ideas of how they can be better people and how the Chicago Marathon can support them to do that. And each year now you've got 12,000 extra people in Chicago that know CPR, and you're improving the city and the community as a whole through your volunteering program compared to asking people to hand out cups. It seems like that's the way you guys are successful in your volunteer program. So, Mike, I really got a lot out of today, and I hope our listeners do as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and all the best in 2021. Let's hope it's a better year for all of us, mate.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, Shannon, and to all the listeners. And, we know we're going to be getting back to in-person racing. And, once we do, I think everyone's going to be excited, from the volunteers and participants and all of us as well. So, thank you so much for this time.
Good on you, mate. Thanks again. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Engaged Volunteer Podcast with Mike Nishi. We hope you enjoyed it. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, then welcome. The Engaged Volunteer Podcast aims to highlight the ways in which organisations and individuals are engaging their communities to connect them to events and causes they're passionate about, with new episodes released each Wednesday fortnight. The best way to support the Engaged Volunteer Podcast is to click follow wherever you listen to your podcast and tell your friends about us. On the next episode of the Engaged Volunteer Podcast, we're very lucky to be joined by Karina Herold, Vice President of Events at the LA Sports and Entertainment Commission. The City of Los Angeles is set to welcome some of the biggest events worldwide over the next 10 years, including the Super Bowl and the Olympic Games, just to name a few. There are no shortages of volunteer opportunities for Angelinos. In this episode of the podcast, we take a look at the unique nature of host cities and the important social, economic and cultural role they play in attracting major events around the world. We hope to catch you then.